In our first lesson on human body systems, we're going to be talking about the cell. And when we talk about cells, essentially what we're talking about is the basic unit of all living things. When we look at the different living things, or organisms as we call them, we see that some of them can actually be so small they're made of a single cell. Things like tiny microbes in a pond. These would be single-celled organisms that you would need a microscope to see, as opposed to something like a human, which is made of over 100 trillion cells, which is a ridiculously large number. These tiny single-celled organisms that we talked about are things that we call unicellular organism, uni meaning one, and these are organisms that are made of just one single cell, things like an amoeba, a paramecium, diatoms that you might find in pond water, bacteria. These are examples of single-celled organisms. And a single-celled organism essentially has to carry out all the different functions that it needs to survive in that one cell. Multicellular organisms are the living things that are made of more than one cell. Things with millions, billions, even in the case of our bodies, trillions of cells that carry out different processes, but we see things like plants, from a tiny blade of grass to a large tree, are all multicellular. Even tiny insects, ants and beetles, all the way up to whales and elephants and giant animals, are all multicellular organisms. Most of the cells that we can see can be classified either as plant cells or as animal cells. We're not going to get into all the details of all the different components of the cell. We call these the organelles, but the nucleus is at the center of each cell. It's kind of the brain of the cell, if you want to call that, the control center that makes the cell carry out its functions. There's a protective covering around the cell that kind of allows certain things to come in and out, and then there's other little organelles in there that do different tasks in order for the cell to survive. Plant cells and animal cells have a lot of the same parts, but there are a few little differences. Plant cells have a more rigid cell wall around them and so forth to give a little bit better protection. But in general, they have most of the same components. Any type of cell, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a bacteria, is going to be made mostly of water. We hear often that the human body is made mostly of water, and that's the case with the cells inside our body. It's about 2/3 water, with the rest of it being the membrane and those other organelles that we mentioned. When we look at the human body, though, as we said earlier, it's a very complex organism with lots of different types of cells. And there's a few examples that we look at, but there's really tons of just different types of cells doing different jobs, even within individual organs and individual systems in our body. But things like nerve cells that send messages to our brains, blood cells that distribute oxygen and nutrients to our cells, our liver cells, which helps that organ function, our skin cells, which give us a protective covering, and things like our bones and our hearts and our muscles. All of these are made of different types of cells, and when we look at them under the microscope, we can see differences in them, but they're all part of this one organism of the human body. And as we look at the different body systems in the upcoming lessons, we'll see how these different types of cells do very important jobs to make our bodies function as they should.